3 times during the dance.
Got a little Pentecostal to me right there.
I told Dan as we were walking in, did you know that the dance of the morning for coming down the aisle is the hula? And he said, yeah, sure. So, I am Samara Michelson. Very happy to see each and every one of you this morning, and I am the worship associate today. Whatever your faith or the country of your heritage, you are welcome here. Whoever you are and whomever you love, you are welcome here. And whether you entered on little feet or walked in briskly or ambled or rolled in or did the hula, you are welcome here. Whether you are relatively new to our community or have been an active member for decades, you are very welcome here. We are glad that you chose this congregation as your place of worship this morning. So remember, if you haven't already, please silence your electronic devices. It is good we gathered together, and now we will have the prelude. I was really feeling in that moment that it would be useful to say that there's so much energy and excitement as we greet each other that the prelude is that time to start to slow your heart rate, to get your breath. So if you haven't already started to feel that, you might notice that opportunity now to really plant yourself here for our hour together. So at the Worship Associate meeting this week, which is a raucous group that meets once a month, we talked about how we're bringing the front of this space down aesthetically so that we can build it up again. It's a time of change with the new reverend, so we've really stripped it down. So that got me thinking a lot about how important beauty is to me. The Irish poet John O'Donoghue, he's a philosopher, a priest, he says about beauty, the human soul is hungry for beauty. When we experience the beautiful, there is a sense of homecoming. Some of our most wonderful memories are beautiful places where we felt immediately at home. We feel most alive in the presence of the beautiful, for it meets the needs of our soul.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Dan Lambert, and I serve this congregation as the minister. The lighting of the chalice is a ritual that unites Unitarian Universalists everywhere and calls us together here in this space as we gather in sacred community. The flame of the chalice is a symbol of so many of our values, including truth, knowledge, love, courage, sacrifice, passion, and the light of being together in community. Please join me in reciting the affirmation, which is printed in the order of service, as we light the chalice, signifying our sacred gathering this morning. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our aspiration, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Thank you. We continue each week to try to hone what we're doing up here and make things work. And if it seems a little bit awkward, well, I do awkward. I'm not scared of awkward, and awkward will happen almost every week. So I'm not sure where to put that in the order of service, but just assume that the word awkward is there pretty much every place in the order of service. It's great to see you here. It's wonderful to have friends and visitors with us. If this is your first time, or if you're coming back after a while of absence, we'd really love to welcome you today. And so we, on a volunteer basis, ask you to stand and introduce yourself if you're a visitor or if you're coming back after an absence. Maybe a snowbird or a sunbird or a fogbird or whatever you like to call yourself as. And just introduce yourself. You can tell us your name, where you're from, and why you decided to visit us this morning. Is there anybody that would like to stand and say hello to us? We do have a microphone that will come around so that we can all hear you well. Anybody like to stand and say hello? So I see that hand in the back.
Hi, I'm Abby Gage from the Venice congregation, and I'm here again because of Mary Ann, and also I got to ride share with someone.
Oh, nice to have you. Welcome. Nice to have you.
I'm Lindsay Cohenberg, back from Ohio, and I know some of you, and I'm your climate connection, and I'm here because you guys are awesome.
Oh, hi, Abby. Where in Ohio, Abby? Lindsay, I'm sorry.
North of Columbus.
Okay, wonderful. We know that area quite well, my wife and I. Good. Other hands? Other people to say hello?
Hi, I'm Jessica. This is my first time here.
Hi, Jessica. Don't be intimidated. We're friendly. Is there a place where Jessica can see? We fill in the back so much quickly. Okay. That's fine. We love children. No, we love children here, don't we? Yes. We love noisy children because we have plenty of noisy adults to go with them. So you're very welcome. Somebody else, say hello.
Hi, I'm Mary Levine. I've been here before, but it's been over a year because my husband and I went to one car. I am a snowbird, although I'm officially a Florida resident now, and from Michigan, Lansing, Michigan. And as the newsletters were coming to my home, I just thought this is a good time to kind of slide back in, it looks like. So.
Wonderful, Mary. Great. It's very nice to have you. I see fingers pointing somewhere. You've been volunteered.
Hi, I'm Marguerite Sand from Venice and a friend of Mary Ann Cromer's.
Wonderful. Hi, Marguerite. Very nice to have you. Wonderful. Anybody else to say hello this morning? All right, well, please make sure and welcome visitors who are here for the first time, those of you who have been here a while. We do have a social hour following the service, and we invite you to stick around and hang out so that you can get to know us better and we can say hi, and you can eat whatever snacks we have out there. I haven't even noticed what we have today, but I'm sure it's good stuff, whatever it is. Our opening hymn today is number 131, Love Will Guide Us. We invite you to rise in body and or spirit and sing with us number 131, Love Will Guide Us.
Love will guide us through the night.
Not that we'll sing it every week, but we might sing it often. You know, every congregation has their top 10 list of hymns. Even though there's a whole bunch in the hymnal and available from all over the place, you can have a lot of variety, but most congregations I've ever been a part of anyhow have a top 10 list that you sing a lot that really represent your values, but also maybe the singing ability of the congregation. So thank you for that. As I start the message today, and I know it's super early in the service, but we have our time for sharing towards the end. I just want to point out something special. Tomorrow is a day of action to demonstrate against Wendy's, to try to put some pressure on them to sign the Immokalee Workers Agreement. And there's a special action at Wendy's down in Fort Myers tomorrow, and there's an announcement in the order of service. If you're available for that, please come. I will certainly be part of that. We're going to carpool from here. I'm happy to drive. And I know that I've seen purple shirts for demonstrations from the committee, or that maybe have been sold. Are there any more of those around? If I want a purple shirt, can I get one? They're sold out. All right. I'm going to go shopping for purple shirts then. All right, we'll figure it out.
I saw on email this morning that the event's been canceled, so I don't know if you're able to check.
It's been canceled?
I saw a notice also. Yeah.
Okay, well, check our email and Facebook page, and we'll put an announcement if that's been changed.
Yeah.
Wonder what happened.
I don't know, I saw it this morning, so I don't know what's going on.
It's probably the Russians or Hillary or something. We have to blame somebody, right? It can't be our fault. Last week we talked about the Unitarian side of our Unitarian Universe history. And often whenever people learn that we exist or begin to hear about Unitarian Universalism, they go, what on the world is that? And it's like, 100 syllables to try to spit out, and it's not easy to say, and it's even more difficult to explain. Well, what is Unitarian Universalism? And I'm sure if I had a chance to chat with each of you individually, you'd have your own story, your own explanation for what that is. Well, Unitarianism and Universalism both have unique backgrounds that came together really beginning in the 19th century. And so last week we talked about Unitarianism. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about our Universalist roots. It's easy for me to say. That's the awkward part should be in the order of service right there, right? And I would say that most of us historically would identify more with the Universalist roots of our movement than with the Unitarian roots of our movement. Briefly put, if you believe that we're all going to wind up in the same place, wherever that is, even if it's no place, after we die, that all people, indeed all of creation, is equal and should be treated with respect and dignity, then that connects you to our Universalist roots. On the other hand, the Unitarian side of our background says that there is only one God. There is not 3 gods or necessarily a million gods, but there is one God and one God only. Historically, that is the Unitarian side of our background. And you can, of course, be both Unitarian and Universalist, and you probably have some degree of each in your own personal theology. Universalism, like Unitarianism, goes all the way back to the time of Jesus, a couple thousand years ago. Universalism, simply put, means universal salvation. At the time of early Christianity, there were a variety of teachings about salvation that didn't really coagulate into a unified theology until the Council of Nicaea somewhere in the 4th century. And before that, there were lots of people teaching lots of different things, some of which were considered heresies, some of which were considered legitimate Orthodox doctrine, and Universalism was actually one of the very common accepted Orthodox doctrines taught during that time. Universalists believe that everyone is equal and everyone will have an equal fate. Universalists believe that a God of love would not create a person knowing that that person would be so evil or would reject God and would be destined for an eternity in hell. Simply put, that's what universalism is all about. Universalists conclude that all people must be destined for salvation, whatever that means. Really, the thought that there wasn't something after this life was not a part of the thought process or philosophy of Western thought or Middle Eastern thought 2,000 years ago. As I learned about doctrines of harmoniology and soteriology in Bible college and in seminary, I was taught that only those who literally confessed with their mouth their own sinfulness and their need for salvation through Jesus Christ would be going to heaven. Everyone else was doomed to hell. Even if you've never heard about Jesus, even if you lived someplace where nobody had ever reached you, even if there was some type of disability that might prevent you from saying that, even if you had no opportunity, that despite all of those things, God would still send you to hell. Now, alternatively, there's another Protestant theology called Calvinism, which teaches the theory of predestination. Predestination means that God, before the beginning of the world, created every soul that exists and predetermined which souls would be going to hell and which souls would be going to heaven, simply based on his whatever. Some people say randomness, some people would say foreknowledge, if you would accept God or not, but that is Calvinist predestination. Universalists reject that, saying that makes no sense. If there's a creator God, and if that creator God is a God of love, why would a God of love randomly select people that God creates, knowing that many of them would wind up in hell, that he also created? There's a lot of logical and I would say theological disconnects with those theories and those ideas. Universalism rejects both of those notions, either that you have to confess and determine your own salvation, or predestination, that God has ordained someplace for you for whatever reason God might have. Both of those ideas are inherently inconsistent with any kind of God of love, in my opinion, regardless of how you define or understand the idea of God. Most universalists today have come to the place where they reject even the idea of hell or the existence of hell. And that's a change from modern day universalists to ancient universalists. So let's take a little trip back in time to the 3rd century. If you like to do the trip back in time motion, it goes like this. And you're transporting yourself in like some type of a time machine. We're going to go back to about the year 300 in what is called either AD or BCE, before the Common Era, which is CE, however you like to determine that. We're going to talk a little bit about a guy by the name of Origen. And so if we're going to start our discussion about universalism, it's good to start with a guy named Origen, right? Origen was a very prolific Christian thinker, philosopher, and author during this time. He's recognized as what's called one of the church fathers, if you study that part of Christian history. His major work, and he wrote over 1,000 different treatises and books and essays, but his major work that has left a lasting impact is called On the First Principles. It predated the Council of Nicaea, so he published that before anybody could really call him a heretic, because there was no standard orthodoxy, no standard system of belief against which you could measure someone and what they were teaching to decide if they were heretical or if they were not heretical. So Origen believed and taught and wrote that the scriptures, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, this was before the New Testament had been codified. So there were a lot of writings that existed. Many of them were from apostles who spent time with Jesus. Many were followers that came after in the 1st century. But Origen believed that those writings were largely allegorical, largely mythology in their literal interpretation, but that there was something there to learn about God. That was actually a very common belief in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries. It wasn't until centuries after that that the idea that the Bible should be taken literally, to the degree that's possible, even became a teaching. Origen also believed in free will. He believed that God created all human souls before the universe was created, which was common at that time. He believed that those who were evil in some way or had done evil acts had to be cleansed, though, before they could go to heaven. That theology became known as purgatory. Exactly. After about 100 years after his death, which would have been after the Council of Nicaea, his writings were declared heresy by the church leaders of the time. Not surprising. Much of his writing, almost all of it, was destroyed by the church leaders, especially in the Greek regions of Christianity at the time. In the West, some of his writings existed in Latin translations, which is how we have them today, thanks to those folks. According to Universalist historian Reverend George Knight, in the first 5 or 6 centuries of Christianity, there were 6 major schools of thoughts. There were 6 major places that people went to learn about theology or to do ministry or to study theology. 4 of those 6 schools of thought were Universalists. And so early in Christianity, the idea of universalism, of universal salvation, was widely accepted. It was not heresy for the most part. And so that is a fairly recent change in the teaching of Christianity. The first verifiable modern believer in universal salvation in the Enlightenment or post-Enlightenment area was a guy by the name of Gerard Winstanley, author of a book called The Mystery of God Concerning the Whole of Creation and Mankind. It was published in London in 1648. A little bit of geeky information about the development of Universalism in America. In the New England area, American Universalism developed from the influence of various Pietist, Anabaptist movements from Europe, including Quakers, Moravians, Methodists, Lutherans, Brethren, and others. Most of the early followers, the early adherents to Universalism, were of German descent for various reasons. In fact, many of the early writings about Universalism were written and taught in German. A minister by the name of Adam Streeter was the first minister of Universalist congregations in Massachusetts in the year 1774, and he came from a Baptist background. Another popular Universalist was a minister named Reverend Hosea Ballou. And if you've read anything about UU history, his name will come up in many places. He's very commonly referenced. He's being called the father of American Universalism. Another early adherent was Reverend John Murray, who founded the first Universalist church in America in Gloucester, Massachusetts in 1774. Some of you have probably been there. In the southern states, Reverend Giles Chapman, a former Quaker and Continental Army chaplain who married into a Dunker family, do you know what Dunkers are? Dunkers are Christians who believe that you should be immersed to be baptized, not sprinkled or not poured, but you have to be dunked in water, completely immersed, in order for your baptism to be valid. Hence the name Dunker. It's not a donut place, by the way. If there was a business called Dunker's Donuts, that would have more of a theological implication. You could do both, I suppose. And some of you would love to get totally immersed in coffee, I imagine, right? Yeah, give me all the coffee. We can do that. Anyhow, Reverend Chapman started the first Universalist church in South Carolina at the Fredonia Meeting Hall in Newberry County. The first General Society of Universalists was held in 1778, and then in 1781, Elhanan Winchester, he organized a Philadelphia congregation of Universal Baptists. Among its members was someone who, if you're a history geek, a little bit like I am, its members was Benjamin Rush, who was a physician and a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He's the only known Universalist who signed the Declaration at that time. John Murray, an English preacher who immigrated in 1770, helped lead the first Universalist church in Gloucester in the battle to separate church and state. So again, here we have a situation which we continue to fight for and to stand up for, the separation of church and state. We trace that back to the very founding of our nation as a discussion, as an argument, as something that people were trying to promulgate, and this comes from Universalist roots. From its beginnings, Universalism challenged its members to reach out and to embrace people who society often marginalized. The Gloucester Church included a freed slave among its charter members, highly, highly unheard of during that time. The Universalists became the first denomination in America to ordain women to be clergy, and that was in 1863, a lady by the name of Olympia Brown. As it developed, Universalism became a more evangelistic faith than Unitarianism did. After officially organizing in 1793, the Universalists spread their faith across the eastern United States, went north into Canada, and many preachers also then followed the advice of Universalist publisher Horace Greeley, another name you might know from history, and they went west to spread the Universalist message and to plant Universalist congregations. One of these young ministers was a guy by the name of Thomas Starr King. Does that sound familiar to some of you that have been around? Starr King Seminary is one of our UU seminaries where many Unitarian Universalist ministers graduate from today. Thomas Starr King is quoted as saying this about Unitarians and Universalists, who even at this time were coming together to do many works. Universalists believe that God is too good to damn people. Unitarians believe that people are too good to be damned. Have you know that quote? Yeah. I will say that one more time. Absolutely. Thomas Starr King said this: Universalists believe that God is too good to damn people. Unitarians believe that people are too good to be damned. So see the difference? The irony of this statement in this moment in history is that it was taking place at the same time as what's known as the Great Awakening in the United States. The Great Awakening was a Christian movement where preachers were going all across America, having tent meetings, telling people about hell and damnation, and scaring the hell out of them, and getting people, for the first time, they created this sinner's prayer idea. This is where the whole thing of close your eyes and bow your heads. If you grow up in one of these movements, you know what I'm talking about. I don't know how many tent meetings and other evangelistic events I went to where the preacher would say, now with all eyes closed and all heads bowed, if you would like to turn your life over to Jesus Christ right now, just slip that hand up. Yes, I see that hand. Yes, I see that. And nobody knew how many hands were up. There might have been no hands up, but the preacher made it sound really, really good. So this was the Great Awakening. A few decades later, there was called the Second Great Awakening that happened, which was another wave of Christian evangelism and movement in America. Jonathan Edwards was one of the leaders of this Great Awakening. He was a Puritan preacher who was one of the most renowned Christian preachers of the area. He was an athletic and charismatic man who had great power during his preaching to bring entire congregations to fearful wailing and crying as he described the misery and horror and damnation that they deserved. He would, many times in his sermon, talk about hell and damnation and how we are at the mercy of the hands of an angry God. So contrast that to the message of Universalism. About the same time, we have the Reverend Hosea Ballou preaching the opposite message, that we are not sinners in the hands of an angry God, but we are all people who are loved in the hands of a loving God. Once, before a huge congregation in Philadelphia, Reverend Ballou pointed to the children in the audience. He expressed his horror that many of the parents present that day held to that Calvinist, scary hell and damnation theology. And they were asserting in Calvinism that children were inherently depraved, born with sin, born damned to hell. and there was nothing they could do about it unless God chose them to be one of the select. But Reverend Ballou said that is not the God of the Bible. That is not the God that I am preaching. The accounts say that lifting his hands from the Bible and pointing over the crowd, he yelled this so that everybody could hear. "Oh, dear man, oh, dear woman, have you no connections in this world? Are you insulated from human nature? I ask you to look at the companion of your bosom." Speaking of husbands and wives that were with them. "Look to the companion of your bosom. Look on the child of your love. And tell me if you believe that it's probable that those connections originated in sin and are doomed to the decree of heaven to everlasting wretchedness, and that you and your children derive consolation from such a ridiculous belief." The exact opposite message that people were hearing in the Great Awakening. This message did catch hold in America, and at one point at its peak, Universalist was one of the top 7 or 8 denominations in America at the time because of the preaching of positivity. The Unitarians and the Universalists both believed in a God who embraced everyone, and this eventually became central to the belief that lasting truth is found in all religions, and that dignity and worth are innate to all people, regardless of sex, color, race, or class. Both the Unitarians and the Universalists fought together and with others in society to bring reforms, to bring in the marginalized, and to bring help to people who others had given up on. The common theology of this time, the social justice involvement of both groups, inevitably brought the Unitarians and the Universalists together to work on common projects and in common areas. Unitarian preacher Theodore Parker was a prominent abolitionist, defending fugitive slaves and offering support to American abolitionist John Brown. Other reformers included Universalists such as Charles Spear, who called for prison reform, Clara Barton, who of course we know founded the American Red Cross. Unitarians such as Dorothea Dix fought to break the chains of people incarcerated in mental health hospitals. Samuel Ridley Howe started schools for the blind. And for the last 2 centuries, Unitarians and Universalists have been at the forefront of movements in America, working to free people from whatever bonds may oppress them. Discussions between leaders from both the Unitarians and the Universalists about merging started over 150 years ago. There had been a few failed attempts for the groups to come together. The Universalists had their denomination, the Unitarians had theirs. There was some fear of both losing their identity and their main purpose, but eventually that merger happened in 1961. Throughout history, liberals have been persecuted for seeking the freedom to make religious choices, but such freedom has become central to both Unitarianism and Universalism. And even after the merger, there are some churches who decided to stay uniquely Universalist, others who decided to identify uniquely with Unitarians. Some joined the UUA, others are outside. And in many states, especially in the New England area, there are still very active Universalist societies that give money and help Universalist causes. By the beginning of the 20th century, humanists within both traditions advocated that people could, in fact, be religious even without believing in God. By the middle of the 20th century, it became clear that Unitarians and Universalists could have a stronger liberal religious voice if they merged their efforts. The legacy of our Universalist forebears is one simple doctrine that seems obvious but is too often controversial. That doctrine is summed up in our first principle, the respect for the worth and dignity of every person. That principle explained is this: there is a place in this universe, in this community, in this fellowship for every single person. A place for you no matter who you are, regardless of identity or experience or race or love or creed. All are welcome here. All are included. All are valued. All are loved. It is our responsibility as humans to respect, to protect, and to nurture the well-being of all of God's diverse and curious children. The early Unitarians, the early Universalists, pure and simple, believed that every human being, no matter how strange, how flawed, how unlovable, how broken, or how weird they may seem to you, is to be protected, cherished, welcomed, and loved. That is the Universalist legacy that impacts who we are today as Unitarian Universalists. Amen. Let's sing together hymn number 121, We'll Build a Land. Stand if you're willing and able, and let's sing number 121.